as he is himself actually a scientist from biology. He is the scientific coordinator of the Research Center for Biodiversity and Genetic Resources at the University of Porto. His research is in the field of evolutionary biology and genetic diversity. He has, of course, published hundreds of articles in very famous and renamed scientific journals. He's also director of the doctoral program in biodiversity, genetics, and evolution. Maybe the position which brings him close to what we are interested in, closer even though, is his position as the director of the Natural History and Science Museum of the University of Porto. This is a very important institution whose mission is the construction, as I read on the website, the construction and dissemination of knowledge about evolution, diversity, and the confluence between the natural and cultural worlds. And so this is really right to our topics, so that we are now very curious to listen to Prof. Ferrand on his ideas about life science and museums. Thank you for being with us, Prof. Ferrand, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you so much also for your very nice words and introduction. So let me just start by saying that it's a great pleasure to be here and to share these ideas with you. I thought I was going to do this in Lisbon live, but in some perspective, it's extraordinary in these very strange times that we will be talking about life science and museums, maybe with a different perspective these days after 4 months of a pandemic, because in fact I will talk about pandemics, which is something that in the evolutionary time is absolutely common in every single species that we know. So just let me say that, so I am a professor of biology at the University of Porto. I run a research center in biodiversity and evolution, and for the next 10 years, I will run the most generous European project that was given in present times in Portugal, which is a teaming project that is supported with about 90 million euros for a 10-year period. And this is a collaboration between my research center, the University of Montpellier in France, and the Porto Business School, PBS, okay? And the other side on my other life is about museums. I am the director I've been the director of the new museum of the University of Porto, which I will talk about at the end of this talk, which tries to set up a different sort of museum merging science and art, okay? So I will try to be quite brief about the different slides that I will show you. So today we know, because of the amazing evolution of biology, the sophistication of biology, genetics, genomics, genomes, we have been doing genomes from everything, and today in a very quick way and not at all a very cheap way. For example, the new coronavirus has been sequenced in a few days and immediately released to the world community to do research that we are doing now. For example, in Portugal, we have been sequencing thousands of these new viruses to understand the spread of the disease. So it's genomics that allow us to look at life as a tree. So this is what we know today, the tree of life, the huge amount of diversity that we have in this planet that is arranged in these 3 major groups that we call bacteria, that we call archaea, which are the organisms that we call extremophiles that live in extreme conditions like volcanoes or like in the water in deep ocean, and eukaryotes, where we are our own species. But to arrive to this understanding of life, there was a long history that basically started 500 years ago with the amount or the growing curiosity of our species about other species, about life. And this was the Enlightenment. It was when we started to understand the planet, understand the diversity of life. So everything that was new for us, that was found in different countries, different continents, was sort of curated and sort of studied first in so-called cabinet of curiosities and then natural history museums. Today, these museums have been transformed and they are using the most sophisticated techniques in biology to make a sense of all different forms of life that have been stored for hundreds of years. And of course, we all know that this man was the man that gave a sense to this discipline, to the discipline of biology. We know that he traveled for 5 years around the world, observing all sorts of life forms, and back to the UK, back to England. He never left England again to build his theory of evolution by means of natural selection. And this is considered one of the most powerful ideas any human being had once in life. And we know that his major work is the origin of species. This is one of my favorite covers, which is a very kitsch cover, but very beautiful, that was published by the Lelo Library in Porto, that today we know because of other reasons, because of Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling, as you know. This is an extraordinary book, which is also very well known, because there is a single figure. This is the figure. There is a single figure in more than 600 pages of a long argument explaining the transformation of life along the years, since the very beginning to today. And this is, again, this extraordinary idea that life is a tree because of modification with descent. Well, I've been working all my life with rabbits. So I'm sort of a rabbit specialist, and so I will use the rabbits and what I've been doing with rabbits all my life to tell you about, or to share with you, these ideas that I have today about biological diversity and how important it is. So rabbits, you probably don't know this, but rabbit means, the name of rabbit gave rise to the name of Hispania and Spain. So Spain, the name Spain and Hispania means the land of rabbits, because this was the first animal that the Phoenicians, when they arrived at the coasts of the Iberia, found. And they found so many thousands of rabbits that they named those territories the land of rabbits, that later were Romanized and gave this name of the species. I've been studying this species because it's an extraordinary fact that there are what we call in biology, two highly divergent subspecies. One in the southwest, another in the northwest, and they have a contact, what we call a contact zone or hybrid zone. They are not true biological species, but they are in the way to become true species. What means that they can do or can have hybrids, but the hybrids are not as fit as their parents. So this is a sort of an experiment in evolution that make us, or that offer us, a unique opportunity to understand the genomes of the two species and to understand what makes a new species in biology. So wild rabbits in Iberia, which are still today a very, very common species, a wild species, is offering biologists all over the globe an extraordinary window to understand what is the beginning of the formation of species, exactly as Darwin imagined more than 150 years ago. A very interesting curiosity that I've been telling people for many years is an extraordinary experiment that was driven by the Portuguese navigators at the very beginning of the Portuguese discoveries in the beginning of the 15th century. This is a book that, of course, we all know in Portugal, which is the chronicle of the great discoveries of the Portuguese in the East, and tell us the story, the very, very first trip, which is from Portugal, from Lisbon to Madeira, to the islands of Madeira and Porto Santo. And this text is, of course, ancient Portuguese, which is, of course, very difficult to read, but show us or tell us about the history of a single pregnant rabbit female that was on a boat and that was released in the Porto Santo Islands in 1419. That single rabbit female with their small rabbits were at the origin of thousands of rabbits that then populated all the islands of Porto Santo and Madeira and the Azores and the Canary Islands, etc., etc. Those rabbits were many centuries later studied by Charles Darwin himself. He knew about that story and he was extremely excited about this fact because that population was founded by a single pregnant female, which is something that in biology we call the Noah effect, because it's a single couple just originating a full big population. And that population evolved, and the rabbits, many centuries after, were very different from the rabbits that were in the continent, in the Portuguese continental territory. And so Darwin was extremely interested on this, and before he published The Origin of Species, he wrote to a friend in America about the history of the Portuguese. This is an original letter by Charles Darwin, which is now in Philadelphia in the American Philosophical Society, where Darwin describes the Portuguese discoveries, where Darwin describes, it even names Gonçalves Zarco and other Portuguese navigators. He describes the fact that a single pregnant female was at the origin of those rabbits. And then, look, among thousands of different letters that people have studied, that are now online, as you know, this one is extremely different because it's underlined, it has exclamation dots, which is something very bizarre in a very phlegmatic British person like Charles Darwin, where he says, if the characteristics of the Porto Santo rabbits are true, then this is a new species. And this is extraordinary because Darwin was obsessed already at that time with the idea of having a proof of his origin. He didn't have a proof. And he thought about having a proof at some point of his development of this idea by an experiment that was in fact a consequence of the Portuguese discovery, of the early steps of the Portuguese discoveries by expanding animals all over the globe, which is something that today characterizes our planet. So this is an extraordinary curiosity linking a fact of a step of the Portuguese discoveries with the extraordinary mind of a man like Charles Darwin. Today, we know, of course, that we are studying life in a changing planet, in a planet that accelerates its changes like probably never before. And we have a very, very deep interest on this. For example, we all know, all textbooks, we all know about the evolution of these butterflies that were studied by the British people on your left before the Industrial Revolution and on your right after the Industrial Revolution. And you can see black and white moths, which variation and which frequency varied according to pollution. On your left, there was no pollution. On your right, there was pollution. So on your left, the black mosses were very visible and all the birds were going to feed on those black ones. But on your right, you cannot see the black moth, you can see the white one, and so the birds start eating the white one. And so the British people, as you know, they are keen observers of nature, and they have documented this for 200 years. And this arrived as an extraordinary example of evolution in action to our days. And finally, with genomics, we now understand exactly why this is working like this. And as you can see, this was the cover of the New York Times and many, many major journals, The Guardian, El País, and big journals all over the world in 2016, when we finally were able to sequence the genomes of these mosses and provide a molecular explanation to something that was just the result of our empirical observation. So we know today very well what are the mechanisms that shape the extraordinary diversity of our world. We also know, after the contributions of the Nobel laureate, the French François Jacot, that there is no plan, there is no architecture of life. So this is really the accumulation of diversity all along this time, exploring different possibilities, but there is no perfect product, there is no perfect design. This is what we call in English just tinkering. So evolution is tinkering. It's just this sort of trial and error, and we ourselves, the human species, is a million of pieces of multiple ways of exploring life and this planet after millions and millions of years of evolution. So this is life, or as it was till 10,000 years ago. But 10,000 years ago, there was something extraordinary that started to expand life everywhere, and this was domestication. So 10,000 years ago, as you know, humans were able to start agriculture. They invented domestication. And what is domestication? So domestication is our ability to transform a wild plant in a domesticated plant, or a wild animal into a domesticated animal. And this was of extraordinary importance, as you know, because it completely changed our species. So we were nomadic, and we became sedentary. And finally, because of having food in a regular way that was provided by a small set of plants and a small set of animals, we were able to construct what we call today our societies and civilization, as you know. I've been very, very interesting and dedicating a lot of time to understand the mechanisms of domestication. For example, of course, we all know our best friend, which is the dog. So we have now more than 400 different dog breeds. I don't know if you know, but we have about 1 billion dogs in our planet, and we are 7 billion. So we have about 1 dog per 7 people, which is extraordinary, because dogs are there only in the last 10,000 years. And today we have basically 1 dog per family. Everybody knows someone, or everybody of us has a dog, or knows someone that has a dog. And we all know that dogs are this huge diversity of sizes, of colors, and of personalities, because we have dogs that are very docile, we have dogs that are not so docile, and we have even dangerous breeds. We know this, that we have this. All this diversity results from the wolf, is the transformation of a single species in a very short time from being a wild animal to being a domesticated animal. I've been studying, of course, this effect in rabbits, because I've been using rabbit, as I told you, as my model to understand life. And rabbits are very extraordinary. First, because they are our last domesticated. Rabbits were domesticated in the Middle Ages, which is extraordinarily recent. Rabbits were domesticated in Europe. It's the single domestication in Europe. All other domestications came from the Middle East, or from the Americas, or from Asia, but not from Europe. Rabbits were domesticated in southern France by the medieval monks in Provence, which is extraordinary. And in just a few hundreds of years, we were able to transform this extraordinary wild animal that is, as I told you, the reason for the name Hispania, Spain, in a huge variety of domesticated animals that we are using more and more also as pets. Darwin himself was very interested in this domestication and understanding the domestication of rabbits, and this understanding is everywhere. For example, in this slide you can see bones that were sculpted like rabbits by some people occupying Iberia about 4,000 years ago. You can see medieval drawings in France from the 11th and 12th century, where you can see that rabbits were to the point of being tamed and appropriated by humans, and they were the selected species for women to hunt, because men were hunting wild beasts, not rabbits at those times, and women were hunting rabbits at home. And they were kept more or less at home in the big properties of those times. And finally, you know this this painting. This is Tiziano. This is Tiziano. This is in the Louvre, in the Museum of Louvre, and this is in the same room of Mona Lisa, just side by side with Mona Lisa, the same room. And this is the first painting, where you can see the name of this painting is The Virgin with the Rabbit, where you can see two amazing things that show that at the beginning of the 15th century, the rabbit was already domesticated. Look, this is a white form, so this is a color form, it's different, this is white, this is not anymore the brown color typical of rabbits in nature. And second is trusts the Virgin. Look, he's totally comfortable with the fact that the Virgin has his hands in the rabbit. So at that point, we can consider that the rabbit is already domesticated. So this is the first time, and of many, many, many times, that the rabbit was part of the paintings in that period of the world, and this is one of the most important and most celebrated, of course. Today we know that the amount of genetic diversity that domestic rabbits have is only a subset. So this graphic just shows you on the top wild rabbits with many, many different dots, which are genes. And then you have different domestic breeds with only these big circles that show that this is only a subset of the original genetic diversity of wild rabbits, which is normal because we have been collecting only a few animals and then select, transforming a wild rabbit in a domesticated rabbit. And this is the most amazing transformation. Why? Because the European wild rabbit, our wild rabbit, is an amazing alert machine. Because all sorts of predators, like lynxes, foxes, wolves, eagles, all eat rabbits. The rabbit is the perfect prey. It's 1 kilogram of meat just playing in our fields. So it's everybody fits or eats rabbit. So the rabbit is an amazing machine, a formidable alert machine. They communicate, they understand the world, they understand, because if they couldn't understand the world, they would die immediately, because every single predator would feed on them. So this is the wild rabbit. And what is a domestic rabbit? Well, a domestic rabbit is this. This is a functional definition of a domestic rabbit. The domestic rabbit is totally unable to understand the world, to understand the environment. If you will put this rabbit in front of a fox, of an eagle, of a wolf or a lynx, he will look like this, and in the second after, he will be dead, because, and he will not understand. So this is, and I'm very interested on this, because this is our understanding today of what domestication is. So domestication in animals is shaping brain function genes. So our domesticates, I talk about rabbits, I talk about cows, I talk about sheep, I talk about goats, I talk about pigs. All these animals today, in their domesticated form, they don't understand the world anymore. They are extremely good in doing many things, in offering us meat, in offering us fur, in offering us litter size. They have many more babies per female, but they are totally unable to understand the environment. And so this is extremely interesting, because it offers us a possibility to understand the modifications of the brain in these animals during a transformation from being a wild species into a domesticated species. We can engineer this. We started engineer biodiversity with this. And today we can engineer many other things in our animals and in our plants. We can engineer color. We can have canaries with red color, or we can have canaries with yellow color, all sorts of colors, all sorts of colors in our cats also, as you can see here. What is interesting again is that many of these genes are the same, so we are sort of tinkering again to build our pets, and so we can engineer personalities, as we are doing, because we have cats that have different personalities between breeds, because we have dogs that have different personalities again, and we have rabbits again, etc., etc., etc. The other part that rabbits are offering us is exactly pandemics, virus. I've been studying one of the most, or if is the most documented viral disease in wildlife that we know in mammals. This is myxomatosis. So myxomatosis is a virus, a different family. It's a myxomavirus. It's not a coronavirus like we have today for the COVID-19. And this virus was was discovered in the late 19th century, and was discovered as being 100% lethal in rabbits, which is extraordinary. It's totally different. It's 100% lethal. And so in 1952, the virus was released for the first time in Australia, in Australian rabbits, because the release of rabbits in Australia by the British people in the late 19th century was the most important economic catastrophe of the whole country, of the whole continent of Australia. Australia was totally transformed by the invasion of rabbits. And you can see here on your left, you can see the lands in Australia with the presence of rabbits. You don't have any grass. And on your right, you have the lands without any rabbits. So this was an extraordinary experiment in biology that was repeated immediately after in Europe and in the UK. And you can see the impacts in populations. And in this graphic, you can see the introduction of the virus. You can see that the rabbits were killed by millions every year, and they almost disappeared after the introduction of this deadly virus. Well, what we did last year was a huge study by comparing rabbits before and after the introduction of the virus to understand the response of the genome by comparing populations in Australia, the UK, and France. And by doing this, and I will not go into the details, we were able to pick up the genes that are now today, 70 years after the introduction of this virus and 70 years after this huge pandemic with lethality values close to 100%, to understand what are the genes that are conferring resistance to this virus in a mammalian genome. So last year we were able to publish this in Science by using this extraordinary thing that is natural history collections in museums, because people were able to preserve rabbits that were collected more than 100 years ago in museums in the UK, in museums in Germany, in museums in France, in museums in Australia. So we were able to compare the genomes of rabbits 100 years ago and compare with the genomes today after the influence, the impact of this pandemic. But of course, as you know, humans want to understand and modify life more and more. And about 30 years ago, there was a step forward, a new step forward into biological engineering, and I'm talking about transgenics, of course. And so we started to understand how to introduce a gene that could modify a characteristic, an important characteristic. For example, you can see here maize that was genetically modified to resist to a bacteria, for example, to a pathogenic organism. And so we started to do this with a huge impact, as you know, a huge impact because of the production, because of crops, because of agriculture, also a huge impact in our societies, because people started to be afraid of what we were doing with our organisms, with our species, at the end, what we were doing with life. And this is extremely important. I'm moving forward into the last part of my talk, because I think it's the most important one. So we sort of not exactly understanding what we were doing, we were modifying this kind of organism like maize or like salmon, for example. This salmon is a genetically engineered salmon that arrived to our market just 2 years ago, after 22 years of studies and of bureaucracy associated with the possibility of selling a genetically or modified organism accepted by people, which is not even true today. But the investment associated with this is absolutely amazing, and we are talking about just a single gene that can transform a small salmon into a big salmon. Of course, this has a huge economic importance. So we know that in the last few years, it is very clear there is a strong dissociation in our societies between people that accept buying and eating genetically modified organisms and people that are afraid, that don't accept this. And for example, this is a very famous letter that was published just a few years ago by more than 100 Nobel laureates saying we need to stop this. There is no proof, there is no theoretical or empirical proof that there is any consequence in our health by using genetically modified organisms. But there is something in there, in the fact that we didn't know exactly what we were doing. Let's say sort of a trial and error to see if this worked. Okay, but finally, just 8 years ago, 2012, there was the last step, which is considered to be maybe the biggest invention in the history of our species. And this is something that was a result of multiple steps in the technological sophistication of biology. And I'm showing you here Kerry Mullis that invented the PCR machine, which is the technique that can amplify till infinite the amount of DNA from any organism, into the possibility of what we call editing a genome, not anymore modifying it, but editing like we are editing a book. And so this technique was invented by an American and a French, two women, Jennifer Doudna in Berkeley, Emmanuelle Charpentier, which is now in Germany. She's the head of one of the Max Planck Institutes in Germany. And these two women are now pop stars, totally pop stars, because they invented what is, we know, the CRISPR technique that allow us to be the masters of life. We can, with this, we can really edit any genome and modify any genome for any purpose. It just depends on our knowledge and on the availability or on the understanding of the consequences of what we will do with this. For example, genomic engineering, that is the addition of genomes, has illimited possibilities in human gene therapy, in agriculture, crops, animals, everything related with synthetic biology, understanding or let's say reconstructing our damaged ecosystems, solving the problem of invasive and exotic species, and so on, and so on. And so it's really a new possibility, a new way, a new field that has amazing possibilities for the future. But this is the limit of what we can do in biology. And of course, here, the dissociation between what we know in our labs and what the general citizen understands is huge. And that's why I decided in the last years that I needed to do something different, not being all the time in my lab, but contributing to this general understanding for everybody, for the general citizens, for all publics, from young kids to adults from all backgrounds. And so I was sort of thinking, what should I do? How can I do this here with my limited possibilities at the University of Porto? And I thought, well, we need to enlighten people. We need to show people that there is beauty in life, that we can be absolutely amazed with extraordinary diversity and beauty of life in our planet, and sort of restore our sense of species. That's why I chose this comment that was published a few years ago in Nature. And maybe you recognize David Attenborough, a very young David Attenborough here with a shame. And this idea so led me to combining art and science. This is where I was an undergrad student in Porto, at the University of Porto, this house. This was the Institute of Botany from 1950 to 2010. And this house was the house of Sofia de Melo Breiner Anderson, one of the most important Portuguese writers and poets, which is in the now in the national pantheon, as you know, and that has really a a very important presence in all the country. Every single child in our country will read at some point some of the popular literature by Sophia de Mello Brainer Anderson. And in an extraordinary book in the 60s, last century, she imagined her house with this amazing skeleton of a blue whale in house. And so I went there, I found the skeleton that she visited when she was a child, and I put the skeleton in a house as she imagined. And this was the beginning of the new museum of the University of Porto, combining art and science through enlightenment. Look at this. On your left, you have one of the most extraordinary drawings of Audubon, an American naturalist. And this drawing was done more than 200 years ago. It's part of the most expensive book that exists today. The name of this book is The Birds of America by Jean-Jacques Audubon. And on your right, you have exactly the same species. This is a osprey in a project of my research center being reintroduced in Portugal. Look, it is exactly the same. It's extraordinary. It's exactly extraordinary. This is a photo today. This is a drawing by Audubon more than 200 years ago. Today, in this part, the first part of the museum, we merge literature and music and poetry in this extraordinary space that is inspired by Sophia, with this whale being the metaphor of a new sort of museum that I want to combine art and science. And this museum in Porto is named the Hall of Biodiversity. What we have is a voyage, is a voyage through life, is understanding what life is that we explain to our visitors. And for every single concept in biology, you have an artistic installation. For example, here you can see that domestication can be hard. With this curtain of maize, you can easily understand, by being absolutely astounded with its beauty, how maize was transformed during the domestication process by our own species. Maize was invented 5,000 years ago in the Mexican plateau, and today is the most important plant that we have in our economy at the global level. As well as this. This is an extraordinary installation which is called Hypercubic Display of Sudden Understanding. Is an invention by, for me, the most original museographer that was Catalan, a Spanish guy from Barcelona. And here you can see birds' eggs, which are some of the most beautiful objects that we have in our planet, that are displayed in this way by organizing them by size, color, and shape. And you obtain this extraordinary installation that was prepared by a designer that is a professor of the fine arts faculty here at the University of Porto. And that is so beautiful that people are just looking at this for minutes and taking all the pictures. And then, because they are enlightened by this, then I can ask the important question, what is an egg? Why an egg is an egg? And then people are really wanting to understand and to think about what is an egg and why an egg is so important. And so we have been doing this, and I think that with the sophistication of biology today, everything that we can do to diminish the gap of knowledge between the people that are in the labs and between the citizens, because we are talking about life. It's not anymore mathematics or physics or chemistry, it's life. We can change life at this moment, at any moment, and this is extraordinarily important for people, everybody to understand. And so, for example, these are documentaries that we are doing all over the globe. This is the Kalahari desert in Southern Africa. This is the islands of Saint Tomé and Príncipe in the Gulf of Guinea. So we have this kind of explorers in residence that are my Renaissance people that do trips all over the world and then come and then explain the world to the people. And this is the buildings that in Central Port we are occupying. This is the second pole of the museum in the very center of Porto. You can see the Clérigos Tower here, and you can see there the Lelo Library, the very famous Lelo Library. So we want people to visit all this and go into the Art and Science Museum of the University of Porto, where the collections are in this building. But this will be the second building of this museum, because the first one, and I'm ending with this slide, is the former house of Sophia de Melbreiner Anderson. You can see the gardens of Sophia, the beauty of the historical gardens of Sophia de Melbreiner Anderson, and also of Rubená, a cousin of Sophia that was also a very important writer of the Portuguese first part of the last century. And the full house is now the Hall of Biodiversity. It's the place where we want people to meet, where we want people to discuss, where we want people to think about life and the consequences of the evolution of biological diversity, and how we can meet art and science and develop more and more this sense of ecoculture. We need to develop this sense of ecoculture at a global level, and not only in an elite of people that are in academia. I really believe that one of the biggest problems that we have today is to avoid or to combat or to diminish this big divide that we have today. Thank you very much.